The Letter Box on Cromwell Grove by Reshma Ruia. This looks like a happy home, is what Olga thought as she stood at the Wilsons' green front door. It was a cold afternoon in late autumn, and the trees on Cromwell Grove were golden brown. As she waited for the door to open, she saw a fox slope by into a nearby hedge, a grey pigeon clamped in its jaw. She shivered as the sun suddenly nosedived behind a cluster of clouds. "Welcome," Peter said, shaking her hand. He was a stocky middle-aged man with a port wine birthmark on the side of his left cheek. Standing next to him, his wife Paula was fair with thin sandy hair and a slight stooped frame. In the kitchen, Paula made them a pot of tea and brought out a plate of McVitie's biscuits and a small lemon drizzle cake. Olga was staying with the Wilsons for a few months. "It's a small house, but we wanted to do our bit and help," Peter said. "Thank you for taking me in. The situation in Kharkiv is very bad, and my fiancé, Dmitry, is fighting at the front." Olga lowered her head and stared at her plate before showing them his picture on a mobile. There was Dmitry, tall with brown curly hair and deep blue eyes, his arm around a laughing Olga whose eyes were as blue as his. "Why? He looks just like my great-uncle," Paula said. "He died in Normandy during the war, had his head blown off." She patted Olga's hand. "I bet you can't wait to be married." "We aim to get married next spring, and then maybe one day buy a house like this." She looked round the kitchen, taking in the enamel cooking range, nestled within the green-tiled alcove, the white sink with its pile of dirty plates, and the row of pine shelves on the wall. Displayed on these shelves were an assortment of china ornaments, mostly cats, cookery books, and black and white framed photographs of babies. A large glass aquarium took up most of the space beneath the window. "Such pretty fish." Olga got up to take a closer look. "They're mostly goldfish and some catfish too," Peter told her. The bedroom they'd given her was on the first floor. It was small with wallpaper patterned with teddy bears. A yellow baby's cot was pushed against one wall, opposite of which was a narrow single bed. Piled on top of the gingham blue bedspread were some stuffed toys. Olga placed her duffel bag on the floor and sat down on the bed with a sigh. "Very nice, but this is your baby's room. You gave me his room?" "It was supposed to be," Peter said. His gaze went to the cot. "Sadly, it wasn't to be. But we kept hold of the stuff." Paula nodded, eyes clouding over. "Only dead babies in this womb," she said, her hand massaging her belly. Her eyes had a faraway look. "But we can't all be lucky. One day, no doubt, you'll have lots of babies with your fiancé." Paula's voice was hard as she looked at Olga. A week later, Olga stood on the landing. She felt alone. The upstairs of the house was dark, shadowy. She looked at the prints of babies on the wall and thought of Paula pining for children. After the initial pleasantries, she found the Wilsons to be quiet and withdrawn. After supper, Paula would leave the kitchen and retreat to the front room with its velvet sofa and orange Tiffany lamps, where she played nursery rhymes on her keyboard. Olga felt obliged to sit with her and listen, clapping politely. She recognized some of the tunes from her childhood. Peter went downstairs to the cellar, and the sound of hammering and sawing could be heard deep into the night. Peter was a collector of antiques. He mainly got them at auctions or estate sales. "Is that why there are all these parcels in the hallway?" Olga asked Paula one day while helping her with the washing up. They stood side by side, scrubbing and rinsing the pots and plates. People keep sending him stuff from all over. We once got a tray full of dentures from a morgue. Can you imagine? Paula said. I've told him so many times to get rid of it. No point dragging other people's death in here. But he won't listen. I love old objects, Olga said. Back home, I was a researcher at the Kharkiv State Museum of Fine Arts. The building's gutted now, all gone in a puff of smoke. You can't rebuild the past with new bricks. It'll never be the same, and... Olga stopped. The Wilsons had sorrows of their own. But what did they know of her world? The speed with which an entire life could collapse, like a pack of cards. Cromwell Grove, the street where they lived, was quiet and leafy. No long-range missiles broke the stillness. The old library nearby held poetry readings, and the neighborhood, with its friendly pub and posters for yoga retreats, was a far cry from the blood and rubble of Kharkiv that Olga had escaped from. She wanted to see Peter's antiques, but Paula told her he was possessive about them. They're mostly Victorian, old cameras, gramophones, medical instruments. He keeps tinkering with them. God knows why. She coughed nervously, pushing a strand of her flyaway hair behind her ear. I hate going downstairs. She came closer to Olga, her hands covered in soap suds, and whispered, I slipped down those damn stairs in my 8th month and lost my baby. Every evening at 7 p.m., Olga's fiancé Dmitri would call her. Their conversation was brief, interrupted by sounds of gunfire and bomb blasts. Dimitri's voice was tired yet hopeful. Once the war is over, we'll go to Paris, he promised her. In the meantime, find a job and keep yourself busy, he told her. She began working at a charity shop on Stockport Road. Peter's office was nearby. He worked for a local firm of tax accountants, and sometimes they'd walk to work together. Paula tells me you collect antiques, Olga said to her. I worked in a museum back home. I'd love to see them. They're my passion. They aren't just old things. They're people's lives. Peter's face brightened. He brought his hand to his birthmark and rubbed it, deep in thought. I'm like a custodian of their memories. The deaths, the sorrows, the pain. It's all there. Olga nodded. We all become stories in the end. I read that somewhere. I'll take you down to the cellar, but just once. And remember, you're never to go down on your own. The air in the cellar was musty and heavy. There was Peter's workbench in a corner, crowded with hammers and pincers. A row of fairy lights strung along the ceiling blinked blue and purple. Metal racks ran the entire length of the walls. A humidifier in a corner made a low, growling sound. Peter pointed out the various objects, lighting them with a torch. Here was a Victorian map of the East Indies. There were wooden jigsaw puzzles and stethoscopes and binoculars rusted with age, the glass speckled with dust. A row of porcelain dolls with straw yellow hairs sat mute on the narrow window ledge. She saw it then. Almost hidden in the shadows stood a tall wooden letterbox. This looks pretty. Olga ran her hands over the letterbox's smooth brown surface and slipped her fingers through the gold-trimmed open slot. Just imagine the love letters that must pass through this. Her voice went dreamy. It's from a Parisian hotel. Must have stood in the lobby for the guests to post their correspondence. The hotel burned down in the 1900s, and somehow this survived, Peter said, showing her the smooth, waxy veneer and the French inscription. Very few dent marks or damage on this one. There was a movement, the sound of something scuttling across the floor. Olga screamed as a pair of mice ran over her foot. She lost her balance and fell heavily against the letterbox, toppling it over. The letterbox lay at her feet, cracked with splinters of wood everywhere. "What have you done?" She heard the raw anger in Peter's voice. When Dmitri phoned her, Olga told him the bad news. "It's only a letterbox, love. Don't worry. He'll fix it." He laughed away her concerns. That night, Olga slept badly. Going down to the kitchen to get a glass of milk, she met Paula. She was standing in the corridor, holding a doll swaddled in a baby's blanket. "You careless, careless girl," she hissed, moving close, her breath hot and sour. Things began changing. Olga offered to pay for the repair work, but Peter brushed her away, saying it was beyond repair. She heard shouting through the thin walls of her bedroom. The sound of hammering grew louder, as did Paula's keyboard playing. One morning, Olga came down to see a note on the kitchen table. Peter and Paula would be away for a few days. Olga was to look after the house and under no circumstances go down to the cellar. The days felt grey and flat. Olga went for walks past the butchers, the kebab takeaways, and Asian shops selling balls of silk. She missed her home. One evening she tried making the red borscht soup her mother had taught her. Humming under her breath, she was stirring the pot when she heard a sound. She turned round and saw the aquarium glass crack. The crack spread quickly, little splinters travelling across the glass until it shattered and a torrent of water gushed out onto the kitchen floor. The fish, blind-eyed and mute, lay writhing on the floor. She mopped the floor, threw away the glass, and buried the fish in the back garden. Dmitri didn't ring her that night. When she called him, there were only faint beeps and a low whistling sound. She called her mother. "Don't worry, Olga. He's deep in the trenches now. There'll be no signal." "Please get in touch, Dmitri. Let me know you're okay," she prayed through the night. The delivery came early next morning. A persistent ring at the front door. Outside stood a young man wearing a peaked cap with the courier company's logo. "Miss Olga Denisenko? I have something for you." The parcel was bulky, and he helped her move it into the hall. What could it be, she asked, but he shrugged. He didn't have a clue. It was a weathered wooden letterbox, reaching almost to her shoulders, almost identical to the one she had toppled over in Peter's cellar. There was the same faint gold lettering that said, "La correspondance devait être postée au moins 19 heures." There was the red velvet trimmed slot for posting them, and an aperture at the bottom where the letters were retrieved. The door to this aperture was missing, exposing it, but apart from that, one flaw and a few scuff marks, it seemed in good conditions. It was a strange gift to receive, Olga thought. Maybe it was meant for Peter. He might have found a duplicate to replace the one she'd broken. She checked the paperwork, but there were no contact details of the sender, no indication of where it came from. At 7 p.m. that evening, on her way up to her room, anxious to call Dmitri again, she saw the newly arrived wooden letterbox in the hall and noticed something white peeping out of the open slot. It was a postcard. She picked it up. It showed a scene from her village, the same snow-covered fields and the red-roofed houses, silhouetted against the sky. At the back was Dmitri's handwriting. "Dearest Olga, I miss you and ache for you." That was it. Every day for the next 5 days, a new postcard arrived for her. One was a picture of them together, arms clasped around each other's waists, laughing at some private joke. Another showed her at the church, dressed in her lacy white confirmation dress. She especially loved the black and white picture of her grandparents sitting in front of the fireplace, holding a glass of beer in their hands. The message was the same each time. Dearest Olga, I miss you and ache for you. And then one evening, when she rushed to the letter box at the appointed hour, she found it empty, like a gaping wound. She knew then that Dmitri was dead, lying cold and rigid in some forgotten field.
You've just heard The Letterbox on Cromwell Grove, a ghost story for Christmas by Reshma Ruia, part of Ghosts at the Old Library with music by Oscilloscope, made possible by funding from the Arts Council and creative director Richard V. Hurst.